Welcome back to another show. Hey guys, it's Mason Greenblatt and Robert Greenblatt here. Today we're going to talk about as is. Is as is really as is, right? We get that a lot, regardless of market conditions. So really, this comes down to two important points that we're going to discuss with you today. And be sure to stay till the end because there's a third point that is really, really important. So 2 + 1 is 3. Got it? Okay. So Mason, when we talk about as is in real estate, really there's two elements to that from a seller's or a buyer's perspective. What are those elements?
So we have condition, the condition of the home, the condition of the inside, exterior, all that kind of stuff, which is, depending on the situation, it could be sold as is. Then we also have the township. So what I mean by the township is the certificate of occupancy.
All right, so let's back up. You're going fast, right? You know this stuff. Those people out there don't know this, right? So when we talk about condition, right, every home's going to have something going on, right? The newer the home, the less likely it's big stuff. Older homes, more stuff, potentially. But when we talk about condition, what we're really kind of thinking about is home inspection, right? Right? So if you're selling a house, you might be a seller that says, I don't want to fix anything. I'm not interested, right? If you're a buyer buying a house, you might say, as is. All right, so the seller's not going to fix anything. That could be concerning to me, right? So that's the condition piece of it that you're talking about, right? So that's the first piece with condition. The second piece is you talk about township inspections. What's that?
So every town's a little different, but in New Jersey, what we have is called a certificate of occupancy or a fire inspection. So typically, when selling a house, the seller will handle certificate of occupancy or the fire inspection if it's not being sold as is.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the game there. So I'll let you jump into a little bit more of that.
Right. So it's different, right? It's important, whatever agent you're working with, if they're familiar with their service area too, because here where we work, the state of New Jersey requires a fire inspection for every home. And the criteria are, I wouldn't say identical, but reasonably similar from a fire inspection standpoint from town to town. So it has to do with the right smoke detectors, carbon monoxide detectors, and fire extinguisher. Typically, there are some nuances from town to town. Now, every time we sell a home in New Jersey, there are certain inspections that are required by the town. Always a fire inspection. And then a lot of towns have what you mentioned, Mason, which is a certificate of occupancy inspection. So sometimes they're combined into one, sometimes they're two different people or inspectors that come out. And depending on the town, that certificate of occupancy inspection might be reasonably simple. In other towns, it might be reasonably, extremely complicated, right?
Yep.
I'll give you an example. So I'll give you an example of a simple one. I was on an appointment this morning. It was a condo in Cherry Hill. We talked about inspections. I was talking to the seller about it. Condo in Cherry Hill, all it needs is the fire inspection. Reasonably simple. And that seller, while he didn't want to necessarily be inconvenienced, he's a busy guy, he said, oh, just a fire inspection, smoke detectors, etc. I'll take care of that because I don't want a buyer or buyer's agent to have to be concerned with getting that scheduled. But it's a much bigger conversation in other towns that we service, isn't it? Because some other towns have multiple step inspection processes. In fact, there are a few towns around here where the rules have gotten so tight that if they find an element of the house, like let's say a heater, let's say you own this house, Mason. I don't even know if you know this. You probably do. Let's say you own your house. You're selling your house today, and you own it. You've owned it for 5 years. Let's say when they do the inspection on your house, they find that your heater didn't have a permit when it was put in. And you say, well, the heater's like 10 years old, I think. It was here when I bought my house.
Yep.
Very common answer.
Yep.
There are some towns that we service where they'll say, we understand that, Mason, but now you, as a homeowner, you have to hire an HVAC company and they have to pull a permit and you have to pay for the permit and pay the HVAC guy and get your heater inspected, or we're not going to pass your house.
Yep.
Fortunately, guys, it's not a lot of towns that are that strict around here, but there are some that are.
And it's a surprise to the sellers too.
Always.
Always. And of course, it's not the best conversation to have, but it's a conversation we have to talk to them about anyway.
Right. I know we go out of our way to make sure that we have these conversations up front right at your listing appointment, because our approach is to educate you through the process. I grew up in a household with two school teachers, so I was always encouraged. Mason's grandparents always encouraged me to ask questions when I was a kid. That was our mindset. So that's our approach to real estate, has always been, hey, ask questions. I'm here to educate and consult you with you. So we got two things, right? We have condition, which is really, it's two inspection elements of as is: home inspection and township inspections, which could be fire and certificate of occupancy, depending on the town, right? Now, here's the thing. Is as is really as is when it comes to the home inspection?
That's the kicker. It's a kicker. It's, every buyer has the right to perform a home inspection, whether it's for informational purposes.
Usually, it's hard for us to always say, just want to be really clear, right? It's hard to ever say always, right? Because every once in a while we'll get a contract that has, like, maybe it's a bank-owned property or an institution-owned property, and it literally removes the right to do any due diligence. Now, don't get scared if you're a buyer. That's rare, but it happens every once in a while. To your point, Mason, in most cases, most of our contracts, even if it's as is, you as a buyer still have a right to do your due diligence and have some period of time to perform inspections. But then what happens if it's as is? What happens? What do we do next?
Nothing. That's the it's an interesting question, because technically it's being sold as is. So when you get that report back, you can make that decision at that time if it's worth pursuing the home and purchasing it, or if it's worth walking away, because we know that the seller is not making any repairs, but we still have the right to ask the seller. So whether we want to ask them for a credit, ask them to fix, A, B, and C on the list, we can still do it. So what happens if they actually do it? And it's not really not being sold as is.
Yeah, so I think what we're trying to tell you guys is that as is isn't necessarily totally as is. So the truth is, even, there's two different ways to look at this, right? There's always a seller's perspective and a buyer's perspective. And that's always important for us to be aware of, because as a seller and buyer, you're gonna have different concerns and considerations. When we're talking as is, when a buyer goes through their due diligence period, it is not uncommon for a home inspection to reveal deficiencies or defects that you as a seller had no idea about, right? We all like to think that our homes are wonderful and in great condition, but I can assure you that if a home inspector spends a few hours in my own home, he's probably going to find some stuff that I don't know about, right? So what if we go through a home inspection and there's a structural crack found, or termite damage to the main beam, or something going on with the roof with a little leak and it caused some mold in the attic? There's all kinds of things, anything, it could be anything in any home, right? So usually, again, we can talk in generalizations, but every situation is going to be different. But usually, if you're not scared of the house, well, let me back up. Usually the contract as a buyer will give you the right to terminate the agreement if you're not satisfied with the results of the home inspection. If you are scared of a couple of things on there, every home inspection is going to have a whole bunch of stuff. And if there's a couple of things, right, Mason, that scared you and nobody expected, we can have a conversation with the other agent in the transaction and say, hey, look, Mason just did the home inspection on your house or on your listing, and there's a bunch of little stuff, and he kind of expected that, but he didn't expect mold in the attic, just to use an example.
Yeah.
So if your client as a seller is willing to help us out with that, either get it taken care of professionally or maybe provide a credit, right, that seems fair to both parties, Mason is willing to continue with the transaction. So Mason, if we, using that as an example, is that really as is? I don't know.
There's no answer.
I don't know if so, when we talk about as now, there's other nuances to this too. Sometimes people waive a certain dollar amount towards inspection items. There, some buyers have gotten pretty creative in the last few years, and I think that that's a nice approach too, but it does bring some complications along with it. So it really depends on the situation. So there's as is regarding home inspection. There's as is regarding township inspections, and some homes could say, hey, I'm not making any repairs, but I'll take care of getting the physical inspections done from the township. And then there's the whole piece of, is it really as is at the end of the day? And in most cases, I'm going to say, no, it's really not,
Yeah, I agree.
If you're making the biggest purchase of your life, whatever that purchase is, because for most of us, our home is going to be the biggest purchase that we ever make. You should have a right to do some due diligence. And in most cases, you are given a window of opportunity to make sure that what you're buying. And that's important.
Yeah. For
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, exactly. Closing thoughts?
As is might not always be as is.
It's true. As is. Yeah. As is not always as is. With that, guys, that's a wrap. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you again real soon.
Thanks, guys.